You ran from me. For years I searched the wrong villages, the wrong faces, the wrong shape of a woman in a doorway. I ran from a lie your name was chained to, your grace. Look at the boy. Look at his eyes and tell me you do not already know. Whose child is this? The rain had been falling on the village of Harrowmere for 3 days when the door of the little apothecary opened without a knock. And the last of the daylight went out of the room as a man filled the frame of it. Seraphine Locke did not turn at once. She was grinding dried feverfew in a mortar, her sleeves pushed to the elbow, a smudge of green on the heel of her hand, and she finished the stroke she had begun, because 6 years of surviving had taught her that a woman who did not flinch was a woman who kept her price. Then she looked up, and the pestle went still in her fingers. He was taller than the doorway wanted him to be, so that he had bowed his fair head to enter, and now he straightened into the amber light of her single working candle. A fine traveling coat, deep green wool beaded with rain, cut by a London tailor who had never seen mud like Harrowmere's. Boots that cost more than her lease. And above the loosened collar, a face she had spent 2,000 nights teaching herself to forget. The strong jaw, the pale unshaven line of stubble, the mouth she had once been foolish enough to kiss, and the eyes. Storm gray, the color the sky turns in the half hour before it decides to ruin you. Julian Hartwell, the Duke of Ellsworth, standing in her shop as though the last 6 years were a corridor he had merely walked down. Miss Locke, he said. His voice had not changed. That was the cruelty of it. We are closed, sir, she said, and was proud that it came out level. The nearest surgeon is at Fen Cross, a half-day's ride. If you are bleeding, I will look at you. If you are not, the door is behind you. I am not bleeding. Then, good evening. You are not closed. Your light is burning. Then I have forgotten to snuff it. Good evening, Your Grace. I have been to 11 villages, he said, not moving. I stopped asking after a lady. I began asking after a healer who charged the poor nothing, and the second man I asked pointed up this street. She set the pestle down so that her hand would have something to do that was not shaking. You have wasted a great deal of good horseflesh, then, for a woman who mends coughs. I would have worn out 100 horses. I very nearly did. Why? Because I did not believe the letter, said the Duke. Not at the end. I told myself I did. For years. And then one morning I woke and knew that I had been lied to, and I have been riding toward this doorway ever since. Seraphine looked at him a long moment. 6 years had made a woman of the girl who had fled him. She wore no jewels, there were none left to wear. Her gown was plain russet wool, gone soft at the cuffs from washing. The color of a thing that had been fine once and had chosen dignity over pretense. Her dark hair, the deep near black auburn that took fire only in candlelight, was pinned up out of the way of her work, and a few curls had escaped at her neck, because there was no one to arrange it for, and no reason to try. She was 28 and looked every honest year of it, and she watched the most powerful man she had ever known regard her as though she were water and he 3 days in a desert. You should not have come, she said. I know it. I came anyway. From the back room, past the curtain of dried herbs, a small voice called, Mama, is it a customer, or is it the rain? Seraphine's whole body turned toward that curtain before her mind could stop it, and when she looked back at the Duke, she saw that he had heard the voice too, and that something in the storm-gray eyes had gone perfectly, dangerously still. It is nothing, love, she called. Stay by the fire. But the boy did not stay by the fire. Children never do. at the one moment a mother's whole life depends upon it. The curtain pushed aside, and out came a small grave figure of 5 years old, in a nightshirt too big for him, and darned wool stockings, holding a wooden horse he had been mending with string. He had her jaw, and her habit of standing very still and taking the measure of a room before he spoke in it. But when he turned his face up into the light to see the tall stranger, he lifted a pair of eyes that did not belong to his mother at all. They were storm gray. They were the exact gray of the sky before it ruins you. The Duke made a sound that was not quite a word. "Tobias," Seraphine said, and her voice did not shake, though every other part of her had gone to water, back to the fire. Now. The boy looked from her to the stranger, and back, weighing them, and then he went. The curtain fell, and the great man stood in the middle of her poor bright shop with the rain running off his coat onto her scrubbed floor, and he did not ask the question. He was too well bred to ask it, and too honest to pretend he did not know. He only looked at her, and the looking was worse than any question. "How old?" he said at last. Not a question either. A man counting. "You will drip on my clean floor," said Seraphine Locke, "or you will leave." Choose. He chose. He shut the door and stood dripping and said, "I will not ask you the thing I want to ask. Not tonight. I only want you to know that I have understood it, and that nothing you fear will happen, not to him, not to you. You do not know what I fear." "No," he admitted. "But I have 6 years of it to guess from, and I am a quick study when the subject is you. To understand why a woman would slam that door if she could, why she would sooner have faced a wolf than that man in her doorway, you must go back 6 years, to a house in Wiltshire she had once believed was safe, and to the night she became, in the mouths of everyone who had ever curtsied to her. The girl who ran. She had been an orphan and an heiress, which in England is only a polite phrase for a thing to be spent. Her father had died when she was 21 and left her a modest fortune and a guardian, her late mother's cousin, a smiling, economical man named Silas Rennick, who wore his grief like a good coat and his greed underneath it, where the lining goes. Rennick arranged the match. A duke, he told her, weeping with joy at her fortune, the young Duke of Ellsworth no less, who had seen her at the Michaelmas assembly and been struck. A betrothal was drawn. Papers were signed, and for one strange bright season Seraphine let herself believe in it. Because Julian Hartwell had walked her through his mother's rose garden and spoken to her not as an heiress but as a person, and once, only once, on a summer night, when the whole sleeping house felt like a held breath, they had been foolish and honest together as gentlemen and ladies are not supposed to be, and she had thought, this is what they never tell you it can be. Then, 3 days before the wedding, packing her father's papers into a trunk to carry to her new home, she found the betrothal contract at the bottom of a drawer, and she read it properly and understood that she had been sold. It was all there in Rennick's neat clerk's hand. The betrothal was not a marriage. It was a machine. Her entire fortune, upon the signing, passed not to her husband but to her guardian, in trust, as a settlement fee, irrevocable, unrecoverable, and the Duke's estate, mortgaged to the rafters by his late father's gambling, would be quietly relieved of Rennick's held notes on the day the vows were said. Julian was not marrying her. Julian was being married to Rennick's arithmetic and did not know it. She was the coin passed between two men, and one of them had dressed her up to look like love. She sat on that drawing-room floor with the paper in her lap for a long time. Rennick found her there. He did not knock. He never knocked. "You are pale, my dear." Wedding nerves. They pass. I have read the settlement. she said. All of it. The part that makes my fortune yours the moment I say my vows. For half a heartbeat the smile did not move at all, which told her everything. A guardian must be provided for. It is customary. You would not understand the arrangements a man of business makes. I understand this one. You are not marrying me to a duke. You are selling me to buy him. And what will you do about it? He asked, gently, almost kindly, and that gentleness was the most frightening thing she had ever heard. Weep to his grace? He signed the same paper you did. Go to a magistrate, a girl with no name and no witness, against your own guardian? Be sensible, Seraphine. Wear the gown. Say the words. It is far too late to be anything but grateful. And then, she did the thing that made her a coward in every parlor in the county. She did not go to Julian. She had no proof he was innocent of it. And she was 21 and terrified, and had learned young that the men who smile are the ones to fear. She took only what money was hers to take, and she walked out the night before her wedding with a single trunk, and vanished into England, which is a very large place if you are willing to become no one inside it. She had not known, that night, that she carried away more than a trunk. Tobias had been born the next spring in a rented room in a town where no one knew her, and she had looked into his newborn face and seen the weather in it, those eyes, and understood that she could never go back, because a fled bride is a scandal. But a fled bride with the Duke's son is a war, and she would not have her child be the ground it was fought upon. So she had made herself a life the size of a keyhole. She learned herbs from an old woman who took pity on her. She moved twice more, and then, at last, to Harrowmere, where the people were poor and kind and asked a healer no questions. And she hung out a shingle and raised her grave gray-eyed boy and told herself, on the good days, that a small honest life, freely chosen, was worth more than a large gilded one she had been sold into. She had told herself that for 6 years. And then the door had opened without a knock. He would not leave the village. That was the first thing. And the maddening thing. A duke could summon her, could send lawyers, could crush her with a single letter, and instead the man took a room at the Harrowmere Inn, a low-beamed place that had never housed anything grander than a wool factor, and he stayed. He rose early. He was seen buying bread. He was seen, God help her, mending the inn's broken gate, because the innkeeper was old and the hinge had wanted a strong hand. And the whole village turned it over at market like a strange coin. You are making a spectacle, Seraphine told him on the third morning, having marched to the inn yard to say it. People will talk. People are already talking, said the Duke, who was on one knee in the mud reseating a gate hinge. They are saying the widow Locke has a visitor. They are not wrong. He tested the gate. It swung true. He got to his feet and wiped his hands. And now he looked up, and the calm gray eyes were not calm at all beneath. Seraphine, I am not here to ruin you. I have imagined 100 ways of finding you, and in not one of them did I frighten you, and yet I have. Tell me how to stand, so that you are not afraid. And I will stand there. She had armored herself against a duke's anger, a duke's ownership, a duke's cold legal certainty. She had no armor at all against a duke asking her leave. You cannot unknow what you saw, she said quietly. No, nor do I wish to. Then what do you want, your grace? Say it plainly. I have no patience left for men who speak in contracts. To know my son's name, he said, whether he sleeps well. 1,000 small things I have no right to, and I will earn the right or I will go, but I will not lie to you about wanting them. so he stayed. And because Haromir was small, and Tobias was a boy of 5 with a mender's hands and an endless supply of broken things, the inevitable happened without her. Her son and his father found each other over a lame cartwheel outside the smithy. "It is warped," the boy was saying when Seraphine came up the lane and stopped dead. "Here, see, the spoke is proud of the fellow." "So it is," said the Duke gravely, crouched beside him. "And how would you mend a thing that is proud of itself? Ease it back slow, never all at once. If you force it, it splits." "Where did you learn that?" "Nowhere, it is only true. Things break when you hurry them." The tall, fair stranger went very quiet at that, and Seraphine, watching their 2 dark blonde heads bent at precisely the same angle over the wheel, pressed her thumb flat against her own palm until it hurt, because it was the only thing she knew to do to keep from making a sound. "He is clever with his hands," the Duke said to her that evening. Having walked Tobias home in the dusk, while the boy ran ahead after a dog, he said it carefully, like a man carrying a full cup. "He mends things. He does not wait to be shown twice." "He is mine," Seraphine said, "whatever else is true. He is mine, and I made him alone, with these hands, and I will not have him taught he was a secret to be ashamed of." The Duke stopped walking. "Is that what you believe I would teach him?" "I believe great houses are very sure of what they are owed, and a boy is a small thing to be owed. He is not owed to me," the Duke said. "He is a thing I lost 6 years before I knew I had him. There is a difference, is there, to a great house? To this man," he said. "I cannot answer for the house. I have never been able to. But I can answer for myself, and I am telling you that I do not want him because he is an heir. I want him because he told me a wheel splits when you hurry it and looked at me with my own eyes while he said it. And I have not drawn an easy breath since. I will spend as long as you require proving the difference to you." The thaw came the way hard country thaws, not all at once, and never announced. It came in small mendings. He did not press her for the truth she would not speak aloud. He seemed to grasp that the word once said would be a door that could not be shut again, and that she must be the one to open it. Instead, he made himself, absurdly, useful. He carried her heavy water from the well when her wrists ached, standing near her at the pump, close enough that she had to tilt her head to answer him, and never once closer than that. "A duke drawing water," she said one morning, watching him work the handle. "Your grandmother would faint." "My grandmother has fainted at less. It is a hobby of hers." He set the full pail down without spilling a drop. "You wince when you lift these. Your left wrist. It is nothing. An old strain. You set a bone yesterday for the smith's boy, and never once winced at his weight. So it is not nothing, and you would carry it in silence until it crippled you. Because that is the only way you have ever been permitted to carry anything." He picked up the second pail. "Allow me the small mercy of the well, Seraphine. I am asking very little. I am asking to be of some use to you before I have earned the right to be anything else." It was a careful, measured distance he kept, and she began, to her horror, to depend upon it. He learned the names of her poorest patients and their complaints. When old Mistress Barrow could not pay, it was the Duke who quietly settled the account and swore the innkeeper to silence, and Seraphine found it out only weeks later and did not know what to do with the knowing. "You settled Mistress Barrow's account," she said, when she had cornered him about it. "I did no such thing. The innkeeper is a poor liar, and you are a worse one. Why? Because she is old and frightened, and you would have carried it yourself, and gone without your own supper. And I have more money than any single man has a right to, and nothing worth spending it on. He shrugged. It seemed a small correction to a large injustice. Do not scold me for it. I shall only do it again. In the evenings, sometimes, he came to the shop, and while she worked her mortar and her scales, he sat on the stool by the fire and let Tobias climb him like furniture. And he told the boy stories, not of dukes and palaces, but of a wolfhound he had owned as a child, named Captain, who had been afraid of geese and a frozen pond. And a summer he had broken his arm falling out of exactly the wrong tree. And Seraphine would stand with her back to them, ostensibly measuring valerian, and listen to the low voice fill her small, bright room. Did Captain the wolfhound ever stop being afraid of the geese? Tobias wanted to know. Never once. He stood as tall as a small pony and was the bravest creature in 3 counties. And one gray goose could send him under the table. I loved him the better for it. Why? Because a thing that is brave everywhere but one place is honest about the one place. It is the creatures that pretend to fear nothing you must watch. You will spoil him, she said one night, not turning around. He is unspoilable. He mended my watch this afternoon and refused payment. Where does a boy of 5 learn pride like that? From his mother, she said, who has rather too much of it. Yes, said the Duke softly. I had noticed. One night the boy fell asleep in the middle of a story, mid-sentence, sprawled boneless across the Duke's knee with the mended wooden horse still in his fist. And the great man sat very still so as not to wake him, and looked down at the small face, then up at Seraphine, and neither of them spoke for a while. I will carry him up, she said finally, moving to lift the child. Let me. He rose with the boy gathered against his chest, as though he had done it every night of his life. So careful, so unbearably careful, and he carried Tobias up her narrow crooked stair, and laid him in the little bed, and drew the blanket to his chin. And when he turned in the low doorway, Seraphine was there, and the room was small, and there was suddenly nowhere for either of them to stand that was not near. He looked at her. The single candle put half his face in gold and half in shadow, and his gaze moved over her tired plain features, as though she were the most extraordinary thing he had ever been permitted to stand beside, and his hand came up, slowly, giving her every second in the world to step back, and did not touch her cheek. It hovered a breath from her skin, close enough that she felt the warmth off his palm, and he held it there. 1 second. She counted it without meaning to. 2. His thumb curved as if to trace the line of her jaw, and did not. A 3rd second passed, the two of them breathing the same small pocket of candlelit air, wanting, neither closing the last half-inch. Then he lowered his hand. I told myself, the Duke said, very low, that I searched for you all these years to have an answer, to close a wound. I am a liar. I searched because no other face has ever once been the right face, and I stopped even hoping it would be. And then you looked up from a mortar in a village at the end of England, and I understood I had been a dead man walking about very convincingly. He stepped back, restoring the distance she had taught him. I will not touch you until you tell me to, but I will not pretend, either. You should know what it is you are refusing. She did not tell him to. She lay awake half that night with the ghost of a warmth against her cheek that had never once become a touch, and understood that the danger she had fled 6 years ago was nothing beside the danger of being, at last, wanted honestly. She learned the rest of his side of it on a gray afternoon, walking the ridge above the village, out of earshot of anyone, Tobias down below throwing stones in the beck. You have not asked me the thing you came to ask, she said, in all these weeks. Why? Because a question is a kind of demand, and you have been demanded of your whole life. I did not want to be one more voice telling you what you owed. He watched the boy at the water. I thought I would wait until you trusted me enough to tell me without being asked. I am a patient man. I have discovered I can be very patient indeed, where you are concerned. And if I never told you, then I would have loved a boy who mends wheels and never known why the loving of him felt like coming home. I could have borne that. I have borne worse. He turned to her. But I owe you a truth first, before you owe me any. So let me give you mine. I never knew, he said. You must believe I never knew what Rennick's contract truly said. I signed what my father's solicitor put before me. I was 23 and drowning in debts I had not made, and a marriage was arranged, and I thought, God forgive me. At least she is kind. At least I like her. That is more than most men in my position are granted. And then you were gone, and the whole county said you had jilted a duke for a lover, and I let them say it. Because the only other answer was to admit I did not understand my own life. You did not come after me, she said. It was not an accusation. It was the question that had lived under her ribs for 6 years. I came after you for 3 months. And then Rennick came to me, all sorrow, and showed me a letter in your hand saying you had never cared for me, that you had taken what you could and gone. I believed it, because believing it hurt less than believing I had somehow driven you into the dark. He stopped and turned, and his face was terrible. There was no lover, was there? There was a contract at the bottom of a drawer, said Seraphine, that turned my whole fortune over to Silas Rennick the moment I said my vows, and handed you to him, bound hand and foot with your own debts. I did not run from you, Julian. I ran from being the rope he tied you with. And I could not tell you, because I did not know if you were in it. And because by the spring I had something of yours, I would have crawled across broken glass before I let him near. The Duke was silent a long moment on the windy ridge. Then he said, in a voice gone very quiet and very level, he has my son on a paper somewhere. In law. He has held that paper 6 years. He does not know Tobias exists. No one does. Seraphine, he looked at her with something almost like fear. A man of Rennick's sort does not stop watching a fortune he believes he still owns. I have spent 6 years asking after you in every village in the West. Do you truly imagine I am the only man who has been looking? The wind came cold off the hills, and below them the boy laughed at something. And Seraphine felt the small, safe keyhole of her life crack straight across. Silas Rennick arrived in Harrowmere 11 days later, in a hired chaise, with a lawyer and a magistrate's letter, and the particular gentle smile of a man who has waited a long time and enjoyed every hour of the waiting. He came to the shop. He removed his hat. He looked about at the drying herbs and the scrubbed floor, and the child's slate propped by the fire with its wobbling letters. My dear ward, how thin you have become, and how resourceful. A little shop. Your poor father would weep. He turned the smile on Tobias, who had come to stand pressed against his mother's skirts, and the smile did not change. But the eyes went to the boy's eyes and stayed there, calculating, and Seraphine felt her son go rigid under her hand. Get out of my shop, she said. I shall, presently. I only came to bring you happy news. Rennick drew a paper from his coat with the tenderness of a man producing a relic. Your betrothal to His Grace, the Duke of Ellsworth is, I am delighted to report, still perfectly valid, signed by your own hand, never dissolved. In the eyes of the law you are all but his wife these 6 years, which makes this dear boy very interesting indeed. Because a betrothal is not a marriage, is it? And a child got outside of marriage, to a woman who then fled, is, I am so sorry to use the word before the little man. A bastard. With no claim. No name. Nothing. He folded the paper away, unless of course matters are arranged. A proud house will pay a very great deal to keep a scandal quiet, to see an old contract honored and old debts settled. I am not a hard man, Seraphine. I only ask what I am owed. You are owed nothing, said the Duke from the doorway, and Rennick's smile flickered for the first time. Your Grace, you have saved me a journey. You will take your paper, the Duke said, coming into the room until he stood between the schemer and the boy, and you will leave this village, and you will thank God I found her before you did. Because if you had frightened this child first, I do not think I would have remembered I was a gentleman. But Rennick only spread his hands. Threaten me if it eases you. It changes nothing. The contract is genuine. The boy is base-born. Your family council, he said it delicately, meaning the great and ancient house of Ellsworth, whose name was at stake, has already been made aware there is a matter to discuss. They convene at the great house on Thursday to consider how the family's honor is best protected. I would advise you both to attend. It will go so much easier if the mother is present to be reasonable. He set his hat on his head. Bring whatever documents you imagine will save you. I have seen them all. There is no one in England who fled a duke and came back the better for it. He left, and in the silence Tobias looked up at the two tall people standing over him and said, in his small grave voice, Mama, what is a bastard? Neither of them could answer for a moment. Then the Duke knelt down in front of the boy, all 6 feet of him folded to the height of a child, and said, It is a foolish word that foolish men use for children they wish to make smaller than they are. It means nothing at all. You are Tobias, who mends things and is afraid of no gate. That is what you are. He held out his hand, and after a moment the boy shook it, gravely, as men do. Over his son's bent head, the two of them looked at each other, and the 6 years of running were finished. There was nowhere left to run to. There was only Thursday. The great house of Ellsworth had a long gallery hung with the painted faces of dead dukes. And it was under those cold painted eyes that the family council sat to bury Sarah Funlock and everything she had built. They were arranged like a court. The Dowager Duchess, Julian's grandmother, straight-backed and iron-haired at the center, flanked by his Aunt Honoria and 2 gray solicitors and a bishop's cousin brought for the weight of him. Rennick sat a little apart with his lawyer, the very picture of a reluctant man performing a painful duty. And when the double doors opened and Seraphine walked the length of that gallery in her plain russet gown, her son's hand in hers and her chin level, the whispers ran ahead of her like water down a gutter. The jilt, the fortune hunter, the woman who ran, come crawling back with a bye-blow to sell. Miss Locke, the dowager's voice could have frosted a window. You have caused this family a great deal of difficulty. We are prepared to be generous, for the child's sake, and to avoid unpleasantness. You will sign a settlement, take an annuity and a new name in a distant county, and you will never again present yourself, or that boy, as connected to this house. Mr. Rennick's older claim will be quietly discharged. The matter ends today. She folded her hands. I trust you have the sense to be grateful. Seraphine let the silence stretch. She had stood in worse rooms than this and been more afraid. She was not afraid now. She was, she realized, standing precisely where she had spent 6 years refusing to be dragged. And she had walked in upon her own feet, which changed everything. Before I answer, she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried the length of the gallery and cut clean through the whispering, I should like to see the contract Mr. Rennick keeps producing. the one I am said to have signed. I have never once been permitted to read it in company. Let us all read it together." Rennick's lawyer half rose. "That is hardly, let her see it," said the Duke, who stood by the great cold hearth with his arms folded and had not spoken until now. "She is accused by it. She may look at it." The dowager inclined her head a fraction. The paper was brought and laid upon the long table, and Seraphine came and stood over it and read it slowly, letting them all watch her read. And then she set one finger, a working woman's finger, green stained at the nail, upon the date at its foot. "The 11th of October," she read aloud. "This contract is dated, and my signature witnessed, upon that day, in Wiltshire, in Mr. Rennick's own house." She looked up. "It is a very careful forgery." But he was too careful. He should have chosen any date in the calendar but that one. "Sentiment will not help you," Rennick began. Upon that same morning, Seraphine went on, over him, still quiet, still level. "I was not in Wiltshire. I was 2 counties away, in the churchyard at Fen Abbas, burying my father." From the front of her plain gown she drew a folded page, soft with age, and laid it beside the contract. The parish register of Fen Abbas. The record of my father's interment, in the vicar's own hand, naming me as chief mourner present at the graveside. It bears the very same date. A woman cannot sign a contract in Wiltshire and stand at a grave 2 counties distant in the same hour. One of these papers is false. She lifted her eyes to the dowager. It is not the one a grieving vicar wrote over an open grave. The gallery had gone entirely silent. That register could be forged as easily as Rennick's voice had lost its gentleness. "It could," Seraphine agreed, "which is why I did not come alone." She turned toward the doors. "The vicar is old now and could not travel. But 4 of the mourners who stood with me at my father's grave that day could, and did, and are waiting in your hall, your grace, at my invitation. They remember the morning a man's daughter came alone to bury him because her guardian would not spare her a carriage. Shall I call them in? Or shall we agree that a woman weeping over her father's coffin did not, in the same hour, sell herself in another county? She had outthought him. She had done it in the open, before the painted dukes and the iron dowager and the bishop's heavy cousin. With a dead vicar's honest ink and 4 poor witnesses in a marble hall, not with a speech, not with tears, but with a single date a forger had been too clever to check. And every face at that long table turned, slowly, away from the woman in russet wool, and toward the smiling man who had stopped smiling. "The contract is a forgery, Mr. Rennick," said the Dowager Duchess into the silence, in a voice like a closing vault. "And you have carried a forgery into my house and asked my family to pay for it. There are names for that, and I am acquainted with a magistrate who is fond of using them." Rennick reached for his hat. His own lawyer had already stepped away from him, the manner of a man edging back from a thing that has begun to smell. But before he reached the door, the Duke crossed the gallery in 6 long strides and stood in his path, and did not touch him, only looked, and said, "Lo, you told me she had left me for a lover. You showed me a letter. You let me believe it 6 years, so I would stop looking in the places you did not want me to look." The gray eyes were very still. "I will not strike you. My son is watching, and he will not learn from me that a gentleman settles matters with his hands. But you will be ruined, Rennick, lawfully and completely and before morning, and you will have long years in which to consider that you were beaten by the very woman you spent your life underestimating. Now get out of my grandmother's house." Rennick went, and the great gallery of dead dukes held its breath and waited to see what the living one would do. What the Duke did was turn, before his grandmother and his aunt and the solicitors and the bishop's cousin and the whole assembled weight of his ancient house, and cross the room to the woman in the plain russet gown, and gather the small grave boy up into one arm, so that the child's storm-gray eyes were level with the storm-gray eyes of every painted lord upon the wall. "This is my son," he said. Not loudly. He had no need to be loud, for the gallery hung upon every word. "His name is Tobias. He is a Hartwell, and I will acknowledge him before the king himself, should the king ask me. I was not married to his mother when he was born, and I am not ashamed of it. I am ashamed only of the 6 years I let a liar keep me from the both of them." He set the boy gently down and turned to Seraphine, and now, for once, something in his face was not certain, was almost afraid. "I have claimed the son. I would claim the mother also, if she will have me, and I would have it heard by every soul in this gallery, so that no one may ever again whisper that she came crawling. She did not crawl. She walked in here and took a fraud apart with a parish register, while the rest of us stood about being decorative." A murmur, very nearly a laugh, ran through even the solicitors. "Seraphim Locke, 6 years ago you were sold to me, and you were too brave to be spent. I am asking now, with nothing forcing your hand, and no contract anywhere in the world, and everyone I answer to watching. Will you choose this? Will you choose me?" The Dowager Duchess opened her mouth, and then, remarkably, closed it again. Seraphine looked at him. She thought of the girl on the drawing-room floor with the paper in her lap, who had chosen to run rather than be a thing men passed between them. She thought of 6 years of a life the size of a keyhole, freely chosen and honestly lived. And she understood that this was the first moment in her whole life a man had asked her to choose, instead of telling her what she was. "You did not touch me," she said, "for all these weeks. You waited. I was waiting," he said, "for you to tell me to. Then I am telling you." And Seraphim Locke crossed the last of the distance herself, the half-inch he had never closed, and laid her hand flat against the fine wool over his heart, and felt it going like a hammer. "I chose to run once, to save what was mine. I choose to stay now, for the same reason, because you are mine, Julian, and the boy is ours. And I will not be the rope that binds you. I will be the woman who was, at the last, glad to be found." He kissed her then, in the long gallery, under the painted eyes of every dead lord of Ellsworth, with their son gravely watching, and the Iron Dowager pretending very hard to disapprove and failing at it, and it was not a chaste thing, and it was not a shameful one. It was 6 years of held breath finally let go. And Seraphine put both her stained healer's hands into his fair hair and chose it freely, as she had chosen everything else in her hard, bright life, with her eyes open and afraid of no gate. A year later, the wedding long since done, there was a christening in the chapel at Ellsworth for a small daughter with her mother's dark hair. And the whole county that had once whispered jilt came in its best gloves to smile and be seen smiling. Seraphine, Duchess of Ellsworth, still kept a still room. She had insisted upon it, over the horror of the housekeeper, and the poor of 3 parishes came to her back door for feverfew and willow bark, and were charged nothing, because a woman does not forget the years she was no one. Nor should she. She wore sometimes the plain russet gown, though now she wore it by choice and not by subtraction, and Julian said it was his favorite thing she owned, and she pretended not to be pleased. Tobias Hartwell was 6 now, and the acknowledged heir to the dukedom, and he had his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's grave stillness, and a wooden horse, much mended, that he would let no one throw away. He was clever with his hands. He did not wait to be shown twice. On fine evenings he could be found in the stable yard beside the Duke, their two fair heads bent at the same angle over some broken thing, and anyone who saw them there knew whose child he was, and always had been. No one anywhere used the word Rennick had tried to hang upon him. For Silas Rennick sat in a debtor's gale 2 counties away and smiled no longer, having discovered rather late in life that the woman he spent 30 years underestimating possessed a very good memory and a Duke for a husband. On the night of the christening, when the house was quiet and the guests gone and the new baby asleep, the Duke found his wife standing at the nursery window with the boy's mended horse in her hand. "You are thinking of the shop," he said. "I am thinking of the girl who ran. I should like to tell her it came out right. I do not think she would have believed me. Tell her anyway. Tell her a man with sad eyes and cold hands will walk into her doorway out of the rain, and she must not slam the door. Because behind him is every good thing she stopped letting herself want. She would say you were a liar or a fortune teller. She would say both, and then she would let me in out of the wet. Because underneath all that fear, she was always the bravest person in any room she stood in. I only had the good fortune to notice. He came and stood behind her, near, and let his hand rest at the small of her back, touching now, at last, because she had told him to, and they looked out together at the dark grounds of the great house that had become, somewhere in the last year, a home. She was no coward, that girl, he said. Every soul in that county called her one for 6 years, and every soul was wrong. She ran to save a life she had not yet met, then raised him alone and honest and afraid of nothing. And when the hour came, she walked into a gallery of dukes and beat the lot of us with a parish register. I have known generals with less nerve. He kissed the crown of her dark head. I did not choose you because you were sold to me, Seraphine. I chose you because when they had taken everything, you were still entirely yourself, and I mean to spend the rest of my life glad that I searched the wrong villages until I found the right one. She turned in the circle of his arm and looked up into the storm-gray eyes she had once fled halfway across England, and that she now saw every morning across a breakfast table and every evening in the face of a small mending boy, and she thought that perhaps the truest gift a person can ever be given is not to be rescued, but to be chosen, in the open, with nothing forcing the hand. Outside, the rain that had begun the day he opened her door, a year and a lifetime ago, had long since given over to a clear cold sky full of stars, and inside, in a great house that had learned to be warm, a woman who had been called a coward for running stood in her russet gown and was, at last, exactly where she had chosen to be. If you have made it this far into Seraphine's story, then you already understand the thing she took 6 years to learn, that the bravest act is sometimes not to run and not to fight, but to be found and to choose it. So tell me, as the fire burns low, would you have run that night, as she did, to protect a truth no one would believe? Or would you have stayed and fought in the open from the very first? Leave your answer below. And if this story warmed the hour for you, subscribe and sit with us again by the fire, where the candles are always lit, and every overlooked woman gets, in the end, the ending she was owed.